Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today I'm doing my February wrap-up. So these are going to be all of the books that I read in February. So this month I read 5 books, 2 graphic novels, and I had 2 DNFs. And I'm really happy about that because I would like to reduce the number of books I have on my TBR shelf. It's not like a big deal, but it's like a soft goal of mine to just slowly whittle away at the number of books on my TBR shelf. So let's get started with the graphic novels that I read this month, which are volumes 2 and 3 from The Girl from the Other Side by Nagabe. And this is a series about a world where there's a curse that is passed through touch, and if you are cursed, you turn into one of these big monsters. And so there are the insiders and the outsiders. The insiders are the humans who have not been cursed, and they have walled themselves off from the rest of the world. And then there are the outsiders, who are the people who have been cursed, and so they live out in like the forest. But this is about a little girl who has not been cursed, who has befriended one of the outsiders, and it's about their friendship. And in these 2 volumes we started to get more hints about the curse itself. I think in the first one that I read in January, it was much more about establishing the friendship between these 2 characters, but in these ones it's still about their friendship, but it also is starting to give us hints about what this curse is, maybe what its source is. So I'm really interested to read more from this series and how it expands on that. And I gave each of these 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I have my first 5-star book of the year, which was Mem by Bethany C. Morrow. And this is a really short book. I don't know, is it even 200 pages? I don't think so. No, it's like 175 pages. It's not even 200 pages. But this book was so good. This is an alternate history 1920s Montreal in which they've developed a technology to remove memories from people's minds. But when you remove memories, it has to go somewhere. So it becomes this like duplicate of that person, and it's like a version of them that is just constantly reliving that memory on loop, and they aren't really aware of anything else. And so those duplicates of the person who are just living in this memory forever are called mems. But the main character that we're following in this is the only mem who is able to create new memories. She's not just living her same memory over and over on a loop like the rest of them. She's aware of the rest of the world. She's able to create new memories. Most mems are kept in the vault, but our main character, Elsie, has been allowed to go live out in the world under the supervision of, I think, the man who created this technology. But she's been able to live out in the world for the last like 20 years. But at the beginning of the book, she has been recalled to the vault, and she doesn't know why. And this is really about her learning about some of the advancements that they've had in technology, and also learning about what they have learned in the last 20 years about the ramifications and side effects of removing these memories, and her grappling with her own like existence and self-concept, because as far as anybody knows, she's the only one of her kind, the only mem who is able to create her own memories and live her life outside of just living that one memory over and over again. And she gets to see some of the people who have had memories extracted and how that has affected their lives and their psyches. And this book was just so good. This is like exactly what I want out of like speculative fiction that has like this concept that it is exploring. It like had something it wanted to do, and it just did it so well. And I think also it did a really good job of exploring this concept of like memory and how memory and advancements in technology affect our human experience, and it did it through a human lens that made it much more engaging, and it made it much easier to connect to the story and really understand the depth of the ramifications. While I was reading this, I was absolutely riveted. It just did everything that it meant to do so incredibly well, and as I said, I gave this 5 stars. Then I read Black Wings Beating by Alex London, and I actually listened to the audiobook of this, which I think was a good choice for me. This is one that I got a while ago, and then it's just been sitting on my shelf, and I think my interest in it had been slowly waning over time. So I decided to listen to the audiobook, and I don't think I would have gotten through it if I hadn't been listening to the audiobook. But as an audiobook, it was a lot of fun. This is about a world where birds are like incredibly important to everyone's lives. There are kind of two factions. There's one group of people who capture, train, and sell birds. They have birds fight in the battle pits, like they use birds for hunting, like birds are status symbols. They're just really important to everybody's lives. And then there's also this faction that believes that birds are holy and should not be captured or like messed with at all, and they have this clash between these two ideologies. But the two main characters that we're following are brother and sister, and their father died a few years ago when he was hunting this like elusive, really impressive bird. But since then, the two of them have been supporting their family. When Bryson, the brother, ends up going to hunt down this like elusive giant bird that no one else has been able to capture. And then of course his sister Kylie goes after him to help him because he is not a very competent person, and so she needs to go like make sure he doesn't die along the way. And so okay, there are a lot of things about this book that I didn't like. Mostly I didn't like the two main characters because they're both really annoying, especially Bryson. He's such an annoying person. I just hated him so much. And I hated their sibling dynamic because their whole dynamic is that this cycle over and over of him doing stupid things. She saves him, and then he resents her for saving him, and she feels guilty, and then he does something stupid again to prove that he doesn't need her help, but then he almost dies and she has to save him again, and it just creates this cycle that was so annoying. It's so frustrating. And that cycle was pretty much the entire plot of this book. Like, there was no real plot. The only thing that drove this plot forward and kept it moving was Bryson like doing stupid things and almost dying, and then Kylie having to save him, and like that whole cycle. That was the entire plot. That was the only thing that moved things forward. There was no external plot other than that, and it just got really like annoying, and it's just so cyclical. It just got really frustrating. And yet I still was like really engaged the entire time. There was something about the way it was written that just hooked me right away. I didn't DNF it. I didn't put it down. I wanted to know what happened. It was one of those books that it was really frustrating, but it also just, I think, had this really high entertainment value. I was so entertained and I wanted to know what happened. I don't think I'm going to be reading the rest of this series, but I don't regret reading this one book, and it was fun. I gave it 3 stars. Next, I read Lady Hotspur by Tessa Gratton. This was one of my most anticipated releases of the year. This is a companion to The Queens of Innisleer. It's set in the same world. So this is an adult high fantasy that is a retelling of Shakespeare's Henry IV, but it's like a gender-bent version of Henry IV. And we're following like a bunch of different perspectives, but really there are 3 main characters who are these 3 women who have all been friends. They are all lady knights. They are Banamora, Hal, and Lady Hotspur. And Hal and Lady Hotspur have a romance, and they are kind of the main like romance or the central romance of this story. And the story starts off with a coup in which Hal and Hal's mother are taking over the country and deposing the current king, and also removing Banamora from being the heir. And in her place, Hal becomes the heir and prince of the realm. But Hal had never really intended to become a prince, let alone a king of the realm. But now she's kind of coming to understand the weight of being a ruler in this world. So This book I have kind of mixed feelings about. Overall, I enjoyed it because I love this world. I love Tessa Gratton's writing and the characters that she creates and the character development that they go through. This book was like, it was a journey. So many things changed, and like my opinions about characters changed so many times. And I loved the journey of it. But there were some things that I was kind of disappointed with. I didn't feel as connected to the characters in this one as I was in The Queens of Innisleer. I also felt like the romance between Hal and Lady Hotspur was underdeveloped because it kind of starts right off the bat at the beginning of the book. They kind of like see each other across a battlefield and are like, I'm in love with you. But I didn't feel like there was enough build-up. I wanted to know more about their relationship, and it felt like their relationship just happened and we were just told like, oh, they're in love. And then we were supposed to be like invested in this relationship, and I just didn't feel that level of investment. And I think feeling that investment is really important because their relationship is so central to the story, and it's supposed to be this like epic romance, star-crossed lovers. And like I liked them, but I just didn't feel it as much as I wanted to, and I think that's just because I wanted more development in their relationship, which I was kind of surprised by because I feel like Tessa Gratton usually, or at least from the one other book I've read by her, does such a good job of developing character relationships and having this like nuance to character relationships. So I was very surprised by that. And there were other relationships in this book that I really liked. There are a lot of side relationships, whether they were romantic or platonic, but there were other side character relationships that I was much more invested in because I felt like we got more time with them and got more development. That being said, I still really enjoyed this book. I think we got a lot more about this world, so I felt like I understood it much better after reading this. And also there were still so many characters that I loved, and there were side characters that I absolutely adored. One of my favorite characters, or definitely like my favorite character, was a side character. And like, I have found from the 2 books I've read by her, she has these like sad boy side characters that are just my favorites, that they just make my heart hurt so much because they're so sad and I love them so much and I just want them to be happy. So I really want to read more of her books and find out, like, do all of her books just have these like sad boy side characters that I just will love? And just to like try and explain how much I love this character, there was one day when I was commuting to work while I was reading this, and I have an hour commute each way, and I take the train to work. So I was just sitting on the train listening to a song on repeat. I was listening to like a Florence and the Machine song on repeat. I just feel like her music goes really well with these books because they have this very like naturey, magical feel to them. So I was listening to, I think it was Cosmic Love, just like on repeat and staring off into the distance, just like being emo about these characters and my favorite character, and just thinking about how much I love this character and how sad I am about him. And like, I did that for literally an hour. Like, my entire commute, I was just thinking about how much I love this character. I got some weird looks on the train because I was clearly just like spacing out and staring into the distance, but I think the number of like emotions going over my face as I was thinking about this character probably looked real weird, and I got some weird looks on the train. But I hope that explains a little bit about like how I really just get so invested in the characters in these books. I love the way that she writes characters. So I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars because even though I wasn't as connected to it or as invested in it as the first one, I still thought it was so well done, and there were some characters that I absolutely adored, and I wish that they had been more central, and if they had, maybe this would have gotten an even higher rating. I did not like the ending of this. There were some elements of the ending that I was like real mad about at the end, but overall I really enjoyed this. I will say though that this is pitched as a standalone. I don't think it is. I think that you have to read The Queens of Innisleer before you read Lady Hotspur. I don't think that this is gonna really make sense. And I also don't think that you'll be as invested in this world. I just think this book will be a lot more difficult to get through if you don't have the context of having read The Queens of Innis Lear. So really, I would treat these as a series, and this is the second book. Next, I read Trick by Natalia Jaster. This is a new adult fantasy romance that is set in this world called Foolish Kingdoms. So there are 4 kingdoms that are all categorized by season, and there are peace talks going on at the beginning of this. So the monarchs from these different kingdoms are coming together. We're following 2 main characters in this who are, of course, the main romance in this story, one of which is the Princess of Autumn, and the other is a jester named Poet. And the 2 of them have kind of, not exactly an enemies to lovers, but like they don't like each other at the beginning, and they have this kind of antagonistic relationship, which then develops into a romance over time. And this one I ended up mostly listening to on audiobook. I read part of it physically and then switched over to audiobook just so I could listen to it while I was doing other things. Overall, this was a fun one to read, but I did find myself more interested in like the politics of the world than in the central romance that was happening in this. I felt like there were some parts of the story that were maybe underdeveloped, or parts of the plot that were just overly convenient, but I did have fun reading this, and I got what I came for, really, when I read this. That, you know, I wanted a book that had a jester main character, that the main love interest was a jester, and that's what I got. He was a lot of fun to read about. I enjoy jesters a lot. So it wasn't a book that like wowed me, but essentially when I read it, like I got out of it what I came for, and I had a good time reading it. So I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars. But I also would put a content warning on this for ableism. And the last book that I finished in February was Arcadia by Ian Pierce. This is a book about books. This follows 3 main like locations, but there are like 10 different character perspectives that we're following. The 3 locations that we have are, there's one that is 1960s Oxford, there is one that is a futuristic like dystopian society where they are trying to develop technology that can transport you to other dimensions or can transport you through time. And then there's a 3rd location that is kind of like a maybe medieval fantasy world, where they don't really have gods, but they have this thing that they call the story that they worship, and that they like worship storytellers. And so in this one book, you get like a historical fiction, a futuristic like sci-fi dystopian time travel, and you get like a medieval fantasy all in one book. And this is like a 600-page book, but like still, that's a lot of different stories to have all in one book. But they do like interweave together, and throughout the book we're kind of learning how these different storylines are connected. Although there is a significant amount of time where we have no idea how these are connected. Like, as I was saying, this is about a 600-page book. The first 200 pages, I was like, I have no idea what's going on, but I'm into it. And it wasn't until after the first 200 pages that like things started to kind of make sense and like started to sort of come together. So it takes a little while to really get going. And the way that everything weaves together by the end, I think, is just really well done and really clever and interesting. It just, the way that things are woven together is just so well done. But that being said, I will say that the characters in this, I think, are a little underwhelming. I was really into them at the beginning of the book, but I don't think that they really deepened over the course of the book, to me at least. And characters are really important to me, so I really think that this is one that it's very clever in a lot of ways. It has a lot of references to other things. The like way that these stories and worlds and timelines are all interwoven is so fascinating, but it's not necessarily one that you read for the characters. And since I wasn't as invested in the characters, there was a point where it got to be a little bit of a slog for me because I'm such a character-focused reader. But overall, I still gave this 4 out of 5 stars because I think there's so much about it that I really enjoyed and I just think is so well executed. Then I had 2 DNFs this month. The first one is Beneath the Citadel by Destiny Soria, and this one I was not really surprised that I DNF'd it. I got it a while ago and then my interest in it kind of waned over time, so I decided to pick it up on audiobook, and I just, even on audio, I was not into it enough to keep going. And the other DNF was a surprise to me, which was Beasts of the Frozen Sun by Jill Criswell. And I'll be talking about both of these in my winter DNFs video that should be coming out hopefully next week. And finally, to end on a more positive note, I'll tell you what I am currently reading. So right now, I just started Tower of Thorns by Juliet Marillier, which is of course a reread. It's the second book in the Blackthorn and Grimm trilogy. And then I am listening to the audiobook of Rosemary and Rue by Shauna Maguire, which is the first book in the October Daye series, which is an urban fantasy fae series. So that is all for my February wrap up. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!